you've indicated that what you're going to do is ensure that you are hands-on in the way in which you manage, monitor and work with the state-owned enterprises. What do you mean by hands-on?
We are going to pay close attention to how the SOEs are able to balance their commercial and their developmental roles. We want to ensure that there is no conflict between the two, that in actual fact we are able to use the strength of the SOE balance sheet to realize the developmental goals of the national government. So there is a number of interventions that we are going to make, one of them being to meet regularly with the chairpersons of the boards, the other one being to meet at the chairpersons forums with all the chairpersons of all the SOEs. The other mechanism being to ensure that we pay close attention to such issues as the strategic intent statements, the corporate plans, the shareholder compacts, and we utilize the Isibuko dashboard to monitor the performance of the SOEs and ensure that the boards undertake annual performance monitoring and evaluation so that we are able to assess the strength of each board, so that when we have to make the interventions that we need to make, we know exactly what we have to do and where we have to intervene.
Now, are you aware, though, Minister, of the limitations of your powers as you play this oversight role? There still needs to be a degree of leverage and discretion that you leave in the hands of the board.
Well, absolutely. We are aware of the limitations, but being aware of the limitations, we also need to be aware of the extent of our power, of the leverage that we have in terms of these SOEs. Because at the end of the day, these are state-owned entities. They've got to fulfill the developmental objectives of the state. The state is the sole shareholder, and therefore the state must exercise its shareholder responsibility to ensure that its developmental goals are met.
Let's talk about the troubles that have existed in state-owned enterprises, not across the board, but many of them have had major difficulties between the board and the executive, and consequently this has required the minister to intervene one way or another. What are you doing, just by way of introducing a different set of corporate governance principles, new standards of best practice to try to limit this pervasive problem?
Actually, in your question lies exactly the answer. In that we need to ensure that we comply with corporate governance. We need to ensure that we do monitor these the boards so that we are able to deal with their strengths, to reinforce them in terms of skills where they are weak, to ensure that we assist in monitoring their relationship with management, and we monitor closely the implementation of the shareholder compacts, the corporate plans, the strategic intent statements. And we think that by so doing, by not being hands-off, we would be able to identify the challenges before they escalate, before the horse bolts, and to intervene whenever and wherever it's necessary.
Now, obviously, you're working in an environment where the president has set up a review committee that's investigating and evaluating the work of over 300 parastatals. In that light, are you hamstrung in the work that you do day to day, waiting for the findings which will only be released after September?
No, we're not hamstrung. In actual fact, we are fully supportive of the process. We know where we need to take a step back and wait for the Presidential Review Committee to make its recommendations to the presidency, which would then come to cabinet. But in terms of the day-to-day functioning of the SOEs, they are functioning. There are things that we are not going to do until we are properly advised by a cabinet decision after the PRC has made its recommendations. But those things do not mean that we are hamstrung. As you can see, there is great vibrancy in the SOE environment. We are applying great levels of energy, the sorting out the challenges of leadership at Transnet, ensuring that we continue to implement the build programs at Eskom, continuing to strengthen the balance sheet of SAA, looking at issues of transformation in structures such as Denel and SAFCOL. So there are things that we are implementing, but there will be areas where we will take a step back to await advice.
I'm glad you've just underpinned the 9 key state-owned enterprises that are directly under your stewardship. Let's talk about them individually, starting with Eskom. Obviously, there's some stability now with regards to a new board and a new CEO, and the focus is now on just getting the work done. Arguably, Eskom is the most strategic of all the state-owned enterprises because of South Africa's energy needs as we try to drive the industrial process for the country. The issue though at Eskom is commercial viability, and Eskom being willing to operate in a more flexible environment of more independent power producers. What's your approach to Eskom?
We are discussing with Eskom a number of things. I've accepted an invitation to attend their strategic planning session of the board, where we will look at the corporate plan and some of the things we need to do to ensure that we continue, as you were saying, to strengthen the balance sheet, to ensure that we are able to raise sufficient funds to implement the build program, to begin to look at some of the things that we might have to anticipate in regards to the Integrated Resource Plan 2010. So there are a number of things that we are doing in regard to Eskom to assist it. And among those, of course, is implementing the energy conservation program so that we are able to save energy as the President called on us during the State of the Nation address.
Let's talk about Transnet, a new board, certainly a board chairperson who's also acting CEO. How close are you to appointing a new person, and can you confirm whether it is Brian Molefe, as the name has been bandied about?
Interesting question. Let me start with the final question you asked. Yes, Brian Molefe has been appointed today by Cabinet as the Group CEO of Transnet. So I guess then the other questions fall off. But Brian Molefe is the CEO. I can't concern myself with the speculations and hearsay and rumor. I've heard of a whole series of names of people who were being punted to become CEO of Transnet, but as we stand, Cabinet today approved Mr. Brian Molefe as Group CEO. And
you've just given CNBC the scoop, and I thank you for that. Let's talk about Transnet and what their immediate plans are, which is something that they've referred to as the private sector participation model, which for them, they understand their resource limitations, but also the need to really improve on the transport growth nodes. So they see a big need to partner with the private sector. How are you going to get the private sector more engaged with Transnet?
There is a number of programs that we are looking at with regards to Transnet to bring the private sector in. One of those is the issue of the branch lines. One of those, and I think a big one, will be the adoption of the competitive supplier development program by Transnet, which would ensure that both at the level of customers and supplier industries were able to bring the private sector in. Because in some of the big projects that Transnet has to implement, for example, the projects such as the rolling stock and some of the projects at the ports, you obviously have to bring the private sector in to play some role in that regard. For example, to provide the inputs to develop some of the programs that it needs, the rolling stocks, and various others. So the private sector is going to play a big role, both as customers and suppliers, and at times as partners and competitors with Transnet. We're looking at all of those programs with a view that you need to strengthen Transnet in the role that it plays, and identify the areas where you want to bring the private sector in, and in a manner that will ensure that Transnet enhances its efficiency, it enhances its productivity, it's able to generate the resources through infrastructure investments that will make the organization more productive and generate the revenue to continue in reinvesting in infrastructure development.
Let's talk about the problem child that you have to deal with, and that's the South African Broadcast Corporation. So many millions given away in golden handshakes to CEOs that have barely lasted 18 months, constant issues of board management squabbles, allegations of government interference in news content, a lack of editorial independence, and recently a bailout of the SABC, something that the public, taxpayers, have balked at. What are you going to do to fix the SABC?
Unfortunately, Lerato, SABC falls in the Department of Communication. But what I can confirm is that the Minister of Communication has briefed Cabinet that they are working on plans to deal with all of those challenges at SABC so that they become a thing of the past. I think all of us get embarrassed each time there are problems of this nature at SABC, and we would want to see the national broadcaster performing, executing actually the responsibilities it has to execute and becoming a financially viable organization able to deliver quality news to South Africans.
And Denel is also another state-owned enterprise that's had its own challenges. You mentioned transformation earlier on, but there have also been issues about just returning Denel to profitability.
Indeed, we need to do that. I've been engaging the board of Denel as well as the department about the things which we think as the shareholder need to be done to return Denel to profitability, to deal with the challenges that the organization is facing. I've clearly stated to the board of Denel that I think they need a turnaround program, that the program they embarked upon in the 2005-2007 period was inadequate, that it is time to venture into a new turnaround program. Denel has got to optimize on the space that it has, not only in terms of defense equipment production, but also in terms of non-defense manufacturing. It has massive skills in terms of engineers, artisans. It's got massive capabilities, and I think we have not optimized on all of those in order to achieve the objectives of Denel, and I would want to see on an urgent basis a program that begins to move Denel in that direction. There are, of course, other things that we need to look at, such as strategic equity partnerships or some varied forms of the same that will all put together, ensure that the organization becomes viable. But I don't think we need to waste any more time in terms of ensuring that Denel is brought back to financial viability.
Obviously, Minister, you're very aware of the public debate around nationalization, and I know government keeps on reiterating that it is not policy, it is purely a debate. But this raises the question of the envisaged role of the state mining company, how it's going to operate, where it's going to source its funding from, how you're going to make it commercially viable, how you're going to deal with issues of equity within the mining sector. A lot of questions about its role in this very controversial space.
The state-owned mining company is going to, at the present moment, it's a joint project of the Department of Mineral Resources and the Department of Energy. We're going to hive it off from the Central Energy Fund and establish it. The President and the Minister of Mineral Resources are supposed to turn the sword of this company, where it's going to be based, and we will then outline what it needs to do. But it's supposed to operate like all other SOEs. It will have to compete in the mining sector. It will have to protect South Africa's precious resources. You know, one of the big problems in the mining sector in South Africa relates to beneficiation. it relates to localization. The fact that many of the resources which we dig from beneath our land, our soil, gets exported out of South Africa in raw form and confronts us later in terms of manufactured products, which are much more expensive. And in that way, they do not contribute to the development of the manufacturing and industrial capability for South Africa. One of the things, therefore, that this mining company has to do is to look at all of that, to begin to change the landscape to the extent that it can, because we must not impose on it the responsibilities way beyond its power. We need to realize that it's a baby. We've got to build it step by step so that it arrives eventually at a stage where it is able to do the things we want it to do strategically. Right. Because it's not just a mining company like any other for the sake of making profit for many shareholders, but it's a state-owned mining company. Yes, it must make profit in that it must be financially viable and commercial, but above all else, it must contribute towards job creation, skills development, competitive supplier development programs, youth employment, and all other such strategic programs that the government has identified. Minister,
a final and a brief answer, please. SAA, there is a new board, there is a new CEO. But again, it's also been one of those very controversial ones because we've seen lots of government money coming in to help prop it up. And some are arguing probably should be going the route of Kenya Airways, where you privatize the entity, list it on the local stock exchange, and leave it to the devices of the market.
Well, Kenya has probably different challenges than SAA. There is no intention on the part of government to privatize SAA. In actual fact, government is going to continue supporting SAA as a state-owned company. And the recent investment in the purchasing of the Airbus aircrafts is proof of government commitment to SAA as an SOE and its confidence in the viability of this organization.